let's talk about the build, because our goal here is to do one thing: create tension. We know that this is the secret to having an effective build, but let's get right into some details and ways that we can actually achieve this. Let's start with sound selection and parts. We might want to switch up our sounds here to be a bit more edgy. It's going to perk up the ears of the listener. So we're going to introduce a saw synth part, and the part we play is just as important. We might want to start lower and let it get higher and higher as the build goes on. Having those notes get higher and higher adds a little bit of tension, much more than if it was just the same constant the whole time during the build. We can also add high pads or high strings to the build in order to add this excitement. Anything in these high frequencies is going to perk up your ears a little bit. Take a listen before and after we add this high octave pad. The drums are really important in most builds too. Typically, there isn't a lot of kick in these parts, and the drums focus more on the snares and the snare builds. You can obviously experiment and try new things and new rhythms here, but this is more often than not what we're used to in builds. We can also add rhythmic tension by speeding up the drums. This works really great on drums, but it can also work with percussive synth parts or audio samples as well. We're simply cutting up the sample so that the drums hit on every 16th note. That's pretty good. If we want to take it even further, we can by cutting up the sample again on this last bar so that the snares hit every 32nd note. So as you can see, the snare drum is progressively getting faster. That rhythmic acceleration is going to make this build more exciting. Another trick is to automate effects. This is a tried and true method for creating contrast and motion, which results in tension. We'll take this low pass filter, start it out by filtering out the highs, and then automate it so that the cutoff of the filter opens up as the build progresses. So here we've got the filter on the entire synth group. We get more and more of these high frequencies, which is going to, again, help create that tension. We can also automate other effects too, like reverbs, distortions, really anything that is going to create that contrast throughout the build. So let's try it with a reverb effect on the snare build. We're going to automate the mix knob of the reverb. So now that I've heard that, I actually also want to add a high pass filter on this snare build. And this is going to add even more tension by removing some of these low frequencies as the build progresses. And we'll curve this automation so that it ramps up more quickly at the end. This is a great trick that you can use on all your automations like this. The next trick is to use dynamic contrast. Now, if you're coming out of a verse with a decent amount of energy like this one, sometimes you want a really big build and you actually need to drop the energy at the beginning of the build before building it back up. By doing this, we're creating more contrast and therefore it allows us to get more tension. So we'll take out the high tension strings and the ARP and let those come in halfway through. Sometimes taking away elements from the beginning of the build is more effective than adding more at the end of the build. Another trick is to use fills and effects in your builds. By using reverse effects and fills at the end of your build, you can actually let the listener know that something huge is about to happen, like this. I like what this fill does. Let's cut out some of the end of this snare build so that there's room for the fill to breathe. So that fill sounds really nice. Now let's add some effects. So we're going to use reverse effects and we're going to use two different types of effects. One long effect that's going to pair up with the snare build, and then another short one that's going to pair with the fill. Let's start with the long effect. We're going to cut off the end just to clean up for that fill, and now we're going to add the short effect that's going to just add that final little bit of suction before the drop comes. We'll make sure warp is off because it tends to add artifacts to effects, and we will line it up on the grid. Now, since we've made some changes to the snare build, let's revisit that automation, and we might even boost it up a little bit now that we hear it in context with the fill and the effects. If you're trying to have a really, really big build, you can try adding atonal sounds to your build. And that just means sounds that don't have a precise tone that is in the key of the song. Like when you hit a bunch of wrong notes on a piano, you hear how much tension that builds, and your ear just wants it to go back to the notes that go well together. We can use that same principle here. We'll load up a synth and add this atonal part to our build. If you go into the preset browser and the category FX, you're going to see a lot of really great atonal sounds that you can use for this. I like this one. Let's try adding this in on the second half of our build. So we've recorded it in. Let's line it up, quantize it. So it definitely adds a lot of tension. Now we just need to blend it in with a little bit of automation so that it starts quiet and then builds up rather quickly here. It's so much more tense with that atonal synth part. So those are a few tricks that you can actually use right now in your productions. You might not use every trick every time, but these are just different tools that you can use and try out in different combinations to achieve results. So if you're ready to take your productions to the next level and produce music that is more creative and inspiring, then take the EDM Production Masterclass, now available exclusively at Slate Academy. All inside the Slate Digital All Access Pass, which includes $5,000 worth of award-winning plugins, the industry's most game-changing synth, Anna 2, and masterclass courses from the biggest producers and engineers in the industry, starting at just $9.99 per month.